triage, that speed process works. So really excited. I was actually just on the phone with Anthony earlier this week. They're going to basically kind of do open road for domestic with directly tied to those SBAs loans and kind of help bridge folks, because it's going to take a long time for SBA to actually release money. But my understanding so far is that's really confined to just the US. So again, for internationally based or even organizations working internationally, it's going to be a lot harder. And you know, while there are a lot of nonprofits based here in the US who are working abroad, you know, a lot of those organizations also have staff abroad, and those payrolls aren't necessarily going to be eligible for these SBA loans.
Thanks very, very much. I heard that it was that the nonprofits as a 501c3 registered in the US as a 501c3 can apply, as well as, and of course, the payroll only in the US and not elsewhere. So wondered whether you had heard. Thanks very much for your explanation. Somebody sent me a file, and I'm happy to share with everyone if anyone is interested to receive it.
Thank you, Manaz. And that is a good point. Most of you, or a lot of you, are donors yourselves or institutional donors, and also serve on boards of other nonprofits, so, or are founders of nonprofits. So thank you for looking out for those nonprofits as well. Lisa, Shannon, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think, you know, to Kristen's point that a lot of us are philanthropists here, and I'm curious because you work across so many different sectors. I think we're all we've all been tracking the news. We know what the major needs are, but because you're receiving applications across sectors, I'd be really curious to hear from you. What are some of the surprising needs that you're hearing come up across sectors that, you know, people in the donor community should just be aware of moving forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, you know, yes, PPE, medical equipment, you know, healthcare direct response is definitely something we're seeing. But more of what we're seeing is it really has more to do with the economic fallout than the direct sort of viral spread, if you will, here in the US. So I'll kind of separate it. Well, and around the world, right? So again, anybody who had a fundraising event planned for this spring, like, that's done, right? It got canceled. So even if you are in early childhood education program, if you are like anything, human rights, LGBTQ, reproductive rights, like all of that work is, even if it's not stopping, if some of it is able to continue in this new Zoom life that we're all living, their budgets, like financially, are in trouble. The other thing, you know, I really encourage philanthropists to be aware of is back to that projected losses and projected needs that we're seeing. A lot of organizations might be okay to get them to June, but what they're really worried about, the big one, a lot of folks are seeing a cliff in June. Summers are usually very, very lean months for nonprofits anyway, in terms of the cycles of revenue and when foundation grant dockets are approved and individual donations come in. And now with them having basically lost or significantly reduced all of their Q2 revenues, they're sort of anticipating an even harsher cliff, maybe come June or July. And then a lot of others, and we've actually been warning about this, especially among the more institutional funder environment, there's another cliff that could hit nonprofits really hard in September and October, and that's everyone who pre-COVID was expecting to get institutional foundation grants in September and October based on board meetings that were supposed to be happening now in April and May, and site visits and due diligence that was March through June. All of those processes, if they stop or if they get delayed 3 months, that money that the nonprofit was counting on in September, October is going to not come or is going to be delayed for 3 months. And nonprofits don't have cash reserves, right? They don't have 3 months or 6 months of cash on hand. So they really, I mean, right, they live hand to mouth, they live quarter to quarter, they live on those monthly cash flow projections. And one of the things we've really been pushing on my webinar speaking circuit that I've found myself on when I'm with foundations is saying, whatever you can do, don't stop those processes. Sure, maybe don't look at anybody new, but if they were already in your pipeline, try to keep them moving. Don't cancel your April board meeting, make it Zoom. You know, do what you can to keep that pipeline moving, because if we stop now, we're just going to create another cliff in the fall that's financially will be just as bad or could even be worse than the one that we're all dealing with right now for the next 90 days. So that's something else to be aware of.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up question on that? Because it's sort of how, part of how the email came out and framed this call is just thinking about, for a lot of us who might think about stepping in and trying to participate in some kind of COVID relief versus staying really focused on the nonprofits that we're already really deeply involved in. Just based on your answer to that question, I just want to verify that your recommendation would be stay really focused on the nonprofits we've been involved with already, because they're the ones who are going to be have that indirect impact. Is that right?
Yes, and my answer is unfortunately, right, it depends, right? It is the wishy-washy answer, but it is the truth. One question, another triaging question that we use is, what impact can I afford to lose, or am I willing to lose? And unfortunately, the reality is not everyone is going to make it through this, right? Just like every recession, other analogies that we might draw on in the past, not everyone is going to survive this. So it's awful to say, but it's worth acknowledging. And if you are, in that privileged position of an investor, a donor, a philanthropist, one of the things you have to wrestle with honestly is, what impact am I willing to lose and what impact am I not willing to lose? And that's, can be very humbling to actually explore and take ownership over, but that can also help you draw that line between hopefully what is a both and in terms of staying the course and responding to immediate needs. We are our COVID grants, we pivoted completely to flattening the curve. And our rationale there was saying, look, the economic and social fallout of this, for every day that we can't flatten the curve, is just going to get worse and worse. So because we know we don't have enough money to address the economic fallout, on our own, if we can really feel like we're pushing the needle a little bit and flattening the curve, that upstream target is going to have better downstream effects. But it's going to be different, especially for individual philanthropists. It's your values too. It's going to come out and your risk tolerance, what you're willing and not willing to take a risk on.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Well, I'll jump in with one that I've been hearing often, kind of related to what you just said. Can you clarify though, if you have a limited amount of funding to give away, either personally or through an institution, do you want to double down with your current grantees, or do you advise looking for new grantees that might be doing more things directly to COVID? And a follow-up to that is, when I say you, I know it's not just one person making that decision. So what happens if a board of a foundation is split on this issue? How do you manage those decisions if there's a family foundation or certain people involved?
Yeah, great questions. So double down versus something new. Again, and I know this is easier said than done, but in an ideal world, it is a both and. And that's not going to be possible for everyone. So you are going to have to maybe make some decisions around trade-offs in order to get to a both and. But you know, that's my personal opinion is, you know, hopefully that's where you can land. One thing I will say about new grantees and new initiatives, though, and then all this relief is back to that existing infrastructure and existing mechanisms piece. I do think that if you can put your dollars with somebody who is already exists, that is going to be more leverage than spinning up something totally brand new. And one of the ways we're kind of thinking about this is, right, like the breweries in Seattle that are now pivoting to hand sanitizer. Did they make hand sanitizer before? No. But are they building the machine and the equipment and constructing a new factory from scratch? No. And that's kind of one of the things that we look for or looking for in the impact space too. So just as an example of someone that we just approved a grant for, they're an organization headquartered in California called Talking Points. Pre-COVID, they basically developed a technology platform that allowed teachers to communicate directly with parents, the parents of their students. But this was completely designed around specifically serving the population of Title I parents and specifically non-English speaking parents. Because in these situations, it was, you know, a way to basically increase parental engagement in order to improve student educational outcomes. We have situations where, you know, the parent and the teacher literally can't communicate because of a language barrier. Well, post-COVID, they have, in the weeks that COVID has come, they have gone from serving 400,000 teachers to over 1 million teachers. And as of yesterday, they had over 700,000 additional teachers and entire school districts in their backlog looking to get on the platform. And it's not just to facilitate a remote learning, although that is like 50% of what they're seeing their system being used. I should say the system is also designed to be on text and SMS, because again, designed for low-income families that don't have computers or access to internet necessarily, where a lot of those messages go out. But so 50% of it's being used for remote learning, but the other 50% is being used to tell these parents where they can go to pick up the food assistance that their kids now aren't getting, because these are the exact families that rely on school meals to eat every day. And again, you're talking, these are non-English speaking, don't have access to computers, or this is now for some families their only source of the public health information coming out of school districts. So was it designed as a public health communication platform? No, but the existing infrastructure was there to just so easily say, you know, okay, we're going to give this away we're giving this away for free to every Title I school in the country that wants it now, because it's the right thing to do, and it's what we're going to ramp up. And so kind of that pivot situation. So if you are looking at new grantees, I just encourage you to, you know, look for those. A contrast example, we had an agricultural organization working in sub-Saharan Africa come to us and say, we need money to build hand washing stations. Great intention. We all know hand washing is key in addressing COVID.
Right.
Anybody who's worked in water sanitation, particularly in the global south, knows getting people to actually wash their hands, turns out it's a really, really, really hard thing to do. And there are organizations have spent decades and decades and decades trying to get folks to wash hands in clean water and sanitation. So if you don't have a background in that, your heart is in the right place, but you're probably not going to be as effective at that as somebody who's already in the water sanitation space, working in rural, you know, fill in the blank.
Great examples. Are there other questions? I have one more that I've been hearing too, and you've mentioned this in the past. How do you think that funders or even donors, individual donors, should communicate to the grantees right now? I've been listening to the nonprofits going through different stages of how they're reacting, and some of them are having a hard time figuring out how to communicate. They might be shutting down. we all know nonprofits should be communicating with their donors, but how do you feel about that from a donor perspective? What should the donor be doing with current grantees right now in terms of just communicating?
Absolutely. So pre-COVID, donor grantee communications is a barrier that we have seen dealt with a lot. In the cases where we would get an application directly from a nonprofit that wasn't referred by another donor, and they say, hey, we're running into this problem, this is the impact it'll have on us if we can't, implement a solution. One of the questions we always ask is, well, have you talked to your original donor about this? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. We say, why? And 10 times out of 10, the answer is, we're afraid. We're afraid that even though this has nothing to do with us, this is completely external to us, it's gonna make us look bad, and it's gonna jeopardize future funding. And I would rather do what nonprofits have been doing for decades, which is wait till I get to my final report and say, I served 3,000 instead of 5,000 kids because of these obstacles, but here's how I overcame them, than jeopardize next year's grant by telling them I have a problem now. And there is, this is tied into power dynamics and a whole bunch of other things that are, sort of insidious in our sector. But this communication and lack of communication around failure and around risk is real. And I do think, in COVID, it is that much more amplified. So my advice on, how to deal with that, it's really the same advice I would have given pre-COVID, which is, I do believe donors not only have the responsibility, but really are in the wonderful position and opportunity to take the first step. Over communicate with your grantees. Ask them how they're doing. If they say fine, ask again. If they say fine, ask again. And tell them you want to hear about their problems. You want to hear what's going on. Let them know that you assume something wrong is going on. Don't say, are you impacted? How are you impacted? How is this affecting you? How is this, affecting you? And also tell them what you're doing. A lot of nonprofits that we talk to say they're hesitant to communicate fully and transparently because they're not sure where their donor stands. Is this going to be a donor that's really with me and is going to double down? Or is this a donor that's going to get freaked out and run for the hills? And they don't know. And so it's in their interest to assume that everyone's going to run for the hills and therefore not communicate. So especially if you are, do see yourself as a partner, or you are open to, hearing about those failures, those challenges, that uncertainty, tell them that. Tell them you're that kind of funder. If you're considering double down grants or considering, something else, tell them where you are, and that's going to give them a better chance to express themselves to you. And be clear, right? Be clear and to the point. And then, remember some of the things we've already covered in terms of your own processes and not shooting yourself in the foot. True story, an investor, this was an impact investor. Our loan fund does a lot of work with impact investors because it's, loans, and we offer 5-year notes, and we have folks invest in our fund and things like that. So one impact investor reached out to one of their impact companies, and in the same email asked them how they were doing and how they could help, and telling them that they were postponing their investment committee by 3 weeks, which, by the way, this company happened to be at the tail end of a Series A close and had everything ready. And now the entire round was held up by 3 weeks because this one investor postponed their IC. So again, kind of thinking about the implications and the knock-on effects of your decisions and choices as a donor today.
It's great. I could keep going with questions, but I want to make sure if anyone has a question as a participant, either you put your camera on and wave at me. You can jump in or put it in the chat. And I know people are very busy. I know some people, Jane had to step off because she's doing COVID response for Microsoft. So I know this is, people are coming in and out, and I really appreciate your time. One thing, Maya, in this communication that you've mentioned too is recognizing that this is a very difficult time. As I mentioned at the start, some people have personally been impacted. We just had a webinar this morning, and from the nonprofit perspective, it's very important for us in any communication to check in. If you're checking in with maybe your major donor and ask them how they're doing. Do you have any thoughts? Have you had conversations with grantees where it is something that gets fairly personal? And I think that what we talked about earlier with the nonprofits is that you do need to allow space for that conversation, and then that pivot, similar to the how are you, and now we're delaying. Do you have any advice on how to manage that? Again, this is emotions are elevated right now, and you said be clear, but do you have any more advice on that?
I mean, authenticity and honesty and a dose of humility, it never hurts. I mean, I'm sure you all can directly empathize with this, but the hardest part of being a funder is saying no. And, particularly right now, we are saying no over and over and over to really good organizations that are trying to respond and doing their good work. For the same reasons that a lot of you have to say no. We have our own capital constraints and, our own criteria that the only way to be fair is to stick to it. When we say no, something that we do internally, and this, I think it's not, directly to the pivot, but I think the principles, communication principles are similar. We always give a reason why. We always say, and a specific reason why, not, I'm sorry, but we receive more worthy inquiries than we have money to service. That's just not helpful to not, it's not helpful to nonprofits. Tell them exactly why. You didn't meet our criteria for discreet for this reason. You didn't meet our criteria for unexpected for this reason. In our judgment, you didn't meet mid-implementation for this reason. And the hardest one is always impact, sufficient impact, or what we call catalytic impact, because it is subjective. And once that's the reason why someone isn't getting a loan, and that's the reason why most people aren't getting a grant or a loan from us today, is because if I have to pick between someone that's reaching 10 people and someone that's reaching 1 million people, I'm going to pick the someone that's reaching 1 million people. It's not because the one that's reaching 10 or 100 people isn't doing really good, impactful work, but we've chosen to, prioritize in that case, the scale. And saying that, and we say, we know this is a subjective call, but this is the choice that we have made. We recognize it's a choice, and that's where we sit, that's where we fall, and that's why we're saying no. And I think giving people, especially nonprofits, insight into that logic process, that thought process, not only makes it easier. So in the case which you're talking about, if you have to get to the point where you're saying, no, I am going to pivot, I am going to move away from you, or I'm not going to be advancing your grant to next year as you requested, or I'm going to have to stop funding you. Being honest and taking ownership over the why. One, make sure you have a why, which is really important as a funder. And then two, I'll tell you, we get, for years, it still happens, emails from people saying, wow, your decline was a better experience than yeses that I've gotten from other funders. Thank you. And it is, I think it's a dignity thing. I think it's a human thing. I think it's a respect thing. And if you're willing to show and you know, admit the flaws that of course we are has, and say, look, I know this is a subjective call, but I'm making it, and this is why. I find in 8 years, people respect it. Now, occasionally do they come back and try and talk you out of it and argue with you again? Yeah. But I can honestly count the number of times that that has happened on two hands. And this is for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of applications. So that would be my advice, is just be really honest, even if it makes you look bad or you're afraid it's going to make you look bad. Reputation risk is something that I think that I know foundations certainly, but I think it can be true for individual donors, have a really hard time with. Right now, COVID, we can all afford a little egg on our face. It's kind of the least we can do given the position that we're all in.
That's great. So I have one, maybe two last questions. But one is, people are thinking that this could be an opportunity to make changes for the better in terms of our global development industry, but specifically around relationships between nonprofits and donors. On a previous webinar, a woman made a point that to some extent, the idea of fundraising and donor relations has become so transactional that it's gone beyond what the true meaning of supporting a mission is about, and that this process might change that, because people really do have to go back to the core belief of what their mission is and create those relationships again with donors. And you've mentioned this before in calls. What do you think would you like to change in the donor nonprofit relations, or just in philanthropy in general, that could come out of this crisis and continue beyond this time frame?
There's a lot, but the one that's coming to mind is collaboration. I have never seen more collaboration in you know, the decade, you know, years and years and years and years and years of doing this, and even, you know, pre-Open Road, when I was on the implementing side, working with nonprofits, was a fundraiser myself for a number of years. I've never seen more collaboration than I have in the last 3 weeks. Nonprofits coming together with nonprofits, donors coming together with donors. We just had another grant that we just approved to an organization called Damagi, which operates one of the digital platforms that community health workers use in India and sub-Saharan Africa. Their platform alone covers about 10% of all community health workers and frontline health workers in the global south. They are partnering with Medic Mobile, which is the other largest platform used by the most number of folks. And they're hopefully going to get the money from another institutional, someone in New York, for the first time, they're both building COVID response, and they're going to build this together so their platforms talk to each other seamlessly and are totally open source and collaborated, so it all works. Between the two of them doing that, getting on board and doing it together, that's going to cover the majority of community health workers in the global south, which is crazy cool. And we're seeing it on the donor side too, right? Donors coming together, and that, you know, what I would say team up, right? You see someone that you think is doing something really cool, and again, back to like existing infrastructure, you're like, wow, you're doing something cool, you already know how to do it, team up. I think, you know, we really can go further, faster together. And I'm really hoping that when the dust settles, that those collaborations and that mindset, that we do go faster together, and it's better to go together and team up. I hope that sticks.
That's fantastic.
Hi, Akhtar here. I have a question. Hi, Maya, how are you?
Hey, Akhtar, it's been a while. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. I'm just trying to see whether you are sensing the sense of urgency from funders. Because I don't sense a sense of urgency from funders at all. I feel that there is a lot of great talk of coming together, but it all seems to be still within the same sense of, okay, this is urgent, but this doesn't seem like this is a black swan event, that this is the only crisis of this scale we will see in our lifetime. And I don't see funders actually saying, you know, fine, I'm going to put all my wealth behind this.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to see why is there a disconnect? Or is some of this happening where nobody else is hearing about?
I'm seeing a lot of urgency for ginning it up, for lack of more articulate words, right? I mean, I have been on, again, more Zooms, right? More group talks and specific ones like that are really trying, you know, so there's an entire global energy access coalition that has been meeting 30 minutes a day, every day for the last 3 weeks to try and figure out a massive relief fund for the energy access, clean energy access in the global south, primarily sub-Saharan Africa. And funders, I mean, there's pledges, there's talks, there's dollars being put out there. We are, well, Seattle is unfortunately 4, 6, 8 weeks into this. I think the US as a whole is 2, 3 weeks into it. How much money have I actually seen flow? Not as much as I would like to see. I mean, we ourselves have been in talks for a couple weeks now with some folks to, you know, collaborate with us. And it's all really positive and it's all really great. And the conversations are moving much, much quicker, more quickly than they ever would. But there's not, that follow through hasn't happened yet. I'm optimistic that the money is actually going to start moving. I mean, and there are some folks out there that are doing it. I do think we're going to have this 45-day, 60-day, 90-day lag, and that is going to really, really hurt us. So yes, I don't think the urgency to avoid the 45 and the 60 and the 90-day lag is necessarily there. But that's, I mean, that's why we're here. We've got over $6 million in our pipeline right now for small short-term bridge loans. And a lot of that, like, we're trying to bridge to those bigger funds because that's exactly, like, they're gonna come. But I don't know if it is gonna come in the next 30 to 45 days.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. And I'm getting on to the Seattle Foundation call, which is now next. And great, we raised $16 million, but we raised $16 million last May.
Yeah.
So what's the big deal, right? I mean, so you raised $27 million all in Seattle. If you look at the names of these people, I'm trying to answer, what planet are you on?
I mean, it's hard. I feel both ways. You know, I do feel both sides. I feel your frustration for sure. I also feel the humanity side of it too, right? Like, donors are human too. And not to like put down. I don't know. I think, you know, for me, this is where I come back to the work, right? I just try to come back to it and I say, okay, you know, you can change who you can change. You can't change who you can't change. This is a triage moment and triage it. So where, you know, we're having conversations every day with potential collaborators and putting them through my triage process too, right? Like, I don't have time to waste if you're not serious about potentially collaborating with us because, you know, I just put out $200,000 today. You know, and I put out $500,000 on Monday, and my money's going to run out, and I can keep doing this forever, but not worth my money. And so, I don't know. Yes, and I'm still optimistic, and because I do see things out there that are working. And we have to be optimistic. If we're not, then
No, I mean, I'm just trying to kind of see whether you are hearing the sense of urgency. I mean, I'm thrilled that Seattle Foundation just gave away, I mean, put $10 million already out, which I think is just fantastic.
right.
But again, the need in this community in itself is so much more because the scale is something that we've never seen.
No, it's
And
never
that's the part I'm trying to figure out.
right. Like, so that's the other truth. But can we be doing more? Yes. Can it be faster? Yes. And I see a question here around how the market and economy is affecting donor decisions. Like, absolutely, of course.
Yeah.
People's assets have been cut by massive percentage points and not sure if they're going to recover. And some people have more liquid assets than others, and that's also coming into play. So yeah, absolutely, I see that. I see that happening at every foundation, and there's also some great other counterexamples out there. So Peary Foundation, they're being very, very public about this. They're actually hosting a webinar next week, I think. Peary Foundation, they're based in San Francisco, but they actually have one of the family members lives in Bainbridge Island, so there's a Seattle connection too. They had a really great year last year for their endowment, and they basically decided their COVID response, they're going to take their entire gains from last year and put it into the COVID response. Because they're like, well, I'm supposed to exist in perpetuity, but I'm not supposed to grow in perpetuity. So why shouldn't I do that? And it's going to be millions of dollars that they're now, putting out. So now, and I asked them, because we were talking about this on a peer-to-peer call, and I said, well, don't you think your endowment is going to actually take a hit though this year, and a lot of those gains are going to be lost? And she was like, yeah, of course, but it's still money that's there. And we made X million dollars last year. If we hadn't done that, like the math, it's not a zero sum, right? So I think, but yeah, it's hard. Donors got to get over the fear. They've got to, it's personal.
Mm-hmm. Well, Maya, this has been so fantastic. Thanks. And like I said, I don't think people realize that the Open Road Alliance, you've been doing this. You have risk management triage systems in place. So you doing the Zoom speaker circuit and advising others is the best service you could do, as well as all the grants you're making. So thank you so much for what you're doing. I do think this is a learning phase for donors, and learning how to do this in a time of crisis is something we all need to figure out. And I think that this might not be the only crisis. And like you said, there's things that come 3 months from now, 6 months, 9 months, and even 12 months from now that we all have to think about in the future. So we're at the end of the time for this conversation. Again, thank you all for participating. If you have other topics that you want Global Washington to address, please email me. We have a survey out to all of our members as well that we've been looking through. And like I said, some of our webinars are really geared to nonprofits. We want to do more geared towards funders and our Women of the World philanthropists as well. So please email me if there's other topics. And again, look at our resource page, send your grantees to our resource page. We're trying to keep it up to date on new funding that's available and other resources that we're doing. Thank you all for participating and continuing to do this really good work. Stay safe, stay healthy. And Maya, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you. And if anyone wants a conversation, I just threw my email address into the chat. But of course, Kristen can also reach me and make any connections.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.